Welcome, everyone. Today we are hosting our Spring Invasive Plant Workshop Part 2, Treatment and Control of Invasive Plants. I'd like to introduce Tim Maywald, who's one of our lead trainers for Blue Ridge Prism, and he is going to follow up yesterday's presentation on identification with teaching you how to treat and control invasive plants that you have access to in the spring. So without further ado, Tim, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. If you were here yesterday, you saw, I think, 27 different species of invasive plants that are good target plants in the spring. And what I'd like to do today is to give you two categories of a range within each of techniques you can use to try to deal with those invasives. We'll look first at physical techniques, hand pulling, grubbing, digging, etc. And we'll also look at chemical techniques as well. And there are some occasions when you can combine physical and chemical techniques to control invasives, and we'll look at those. So let's start out looking at this list. We'll take those in order. Physical techniques sometimes are all that you can use because by regulation, herbicides may not be usable if you're working, for instance, in a public space, in a public park, and they're not allowed. Or if you yourself are not licensed and you're in a situation where you need to have a license to apply herbicides, which you don't always need. But there are some circumstances where you do. And you, by choice, may simply be not a herbicide user, so you're going to strictly be using physical techniques. But when you can accomplish our three goals, which are to safely deal with an invasive, safe to ourselves and safe to native plants while you're treating the invasive, treat it effectively such that it's once and done. You've killed that plant. You don't have to come back and deal with it again. And you've done it efficiently. That is with the lowest output of effort, which means there's not going to be any regrowth or there's no excessive effort involved. If you can accomplish those three things using strictly physical techniques, great. And we all use them. I'm an herbicide user, but I use physical techniques every time I'm out. So let's start with the simplest one, which is hand pulling. And you can hand pull just about any of the categories of invasive plants, whether they're woody plants, when they're small at the seedling or even sapling stage, for trees, shrubs, and vines. And of course, for your grasses and your forbs. Forbs being non-woody flowering plants other than grasses. So you can use hand pulling for pretty much anything, depending on size. And also depending on the extent of the invaded area. If, for instance, you're dealing with a 3-foot square area where you have some lesser celandine, or a similar size area where you're dealing with garlic mustard or others like that, it's very effective to use hand techniques, hand pulling. But once you get into really big spaces, obviously you need an army. So you tend to go to different techniques when you get to larger areas. So it's practical for small invasions, practical for new growth, small plants, because their root systems aren't very extensive yet, and it's easy to get them out of the ground. And the good news is if you can get all or most of the root system out of the ground, it won't grow back. So once and done. However, it does require that the soil be moist. The moister, the better. So after rainfall, after snow melt, there's less friction, so it's easier to get the plant out of the ground, and you can take larger specimens out of the ground with hand pulling. So when you start, the way I start, anytime I'm out in the woods and I see a possible candidate for hand pulling, I grab a hold of it, as you see in the photo here, down just above ground level, and I don't jerk it out of the ground. I kind of tease it a little bit, pulling gently in each direction, and that'll give me a sense of whether it's going to come or not. And if I sense that it's going to be able to come out, I'll continue gently pulling. And after I've done that a few times, I'll have a pretty good understanding of what the soil conditions are like and what the size of the plant is that I can effectively hand pull and get most or all of the roots out, which is the goal. And if they just aren't coming, then you've got to go to different techniques, which we'll get to shortly. So test it first. You get a sense of what's going to come and what's not going to come, and then you can go forward from there. One issue with hand pulling is that as you pull it out of the ground and pop the roots out, you disturb the soil. It's going to pull up some soil with it. And invasive plant seeds love to germinate in disturbed soil. So here in the second photo, you can see my big cloddy foot where I've hand pulled some wineberry out of the ground. And now I'm tamping down the disturbed soil, and then I'm going to kick some of that forest flora detritus over the disturbed area. So tamp it down, kick over some forest debris, and you'll discourage the likelihood for germination caused by the disturbance. Okay, so if you're trying to hand pull it and it won't come, there's a number of grubbing, digging, extraction techniques that you can use where you're using a tool to help you get the root cluster out of the ground. And here you can see a variety of those tools. You can use a hori-hori knife. You can use a garden spade. This is grubbing over here in the upper right-hand corner where you have a small hand mattock. And what I've done here is I've stuck it into the ground on the far side of a wineberry stem. And it has a very small clustered root section. So I get it into the ground 3 or 4 inches on the far side of the stem and just lever it up. Of course, this does disturb the soil, and you've got to do some tamping down after that. But these are all effective techniques, even up to the point of using these devices, which you see on the lower right, which are called extractors. Here you see one being used, and you can see the size of the shrubs that you can take out of the ground with these. Fairly good sized ones. And basically all these tools are is they have a long handle with a clamp at the bottom. You put the clamp around the base of a woody stem, and that long arm allows you to apply a lot of leverage to it. So you can pull some fairly significant woody invasives out of the ground using this technique. Again, with every one of these, you're disturbing the soil, and you need to cope with the soil disturbance so you're not creating the likelihood for the disturbance to cause seed germination. Excuse me. So the next step up the line, if you simply can't get it out of the ground using hand pulling or using tool assistance, you can cut them. And the most common tools that you'll use, you see down here in the lower left, are your pruning tools. A pruning saw, a folding saw or a straight saw, a hand cutter, loppers to give you a little extra reach or to allow you to get close to the stem of a prickly plant like multiflora rose, for instance, without having to come in contact with the prickly stuff. And as the stem that you're dealing with gets bigger, you're probably going to have to go to a larger blade. So here you see this is about a 2.5 to 3 inch stem of autumn olive up in the upper left here. We've got a bigger saw out for it. I could be using this tool in the middle upper photograph. This is it's your basic weed whacker or string trimmer. For the ones with larger motors on them, you can take off the string device and replace it with a circular saw blade. Very dangerous tool. You have to be very careful using it, but very effective at cutting woody stems up to 6 inches, because the blade exposure is about 4 inches, and you cut in on one side, cut in on the other side, and you can take out a 4 or 5, even 6 inch stem with not a lot of effort. The machine's doing the effort for you. And then, of course, once you get to the big stuff, this is a big autumn olive over here on the right. You're into chainsaw country. Now, another technique, of course, is mowing. And for some of the invasives that you might find in a meadow situation, bush hogging is an appropriate technique. Every one of these techniques we talked about so far, we're not using any chemicals, no herbicide. This is all strictly physical. So when you're doing mowing, a lot of times you may have to mow multiple times over the growing period. So you may have to bush hog as soon as the invasives get to be up around, knee high or so, thigh high, and they're going to grow back because you haven't used herbicide, you haven't killed the roots. So you're going to have to come back and do it again over the growing period, over the growing season. And as you continue to cut it, if you're cutting it before it goes to seed, um, if your last cut is when there's not enough time left in the growing season for it to grow back up and develop seed and drop those seeds, you're going to, over the long term, over they take 4 or 5 seasons, the invasives aren't going to grow back because you will have been cutting it before it can lay new seed. So over that period of time, it's using up the existing seed in the seed bed, but you're keeping it from adding new seed to it. So over time, you can catch up with this stuff and kind of win the battle. Another very effective tool, particularly for woody invasives, where they have essentially taken over everything, where the only thing you're seeing, for instance, in the understory is autumn olive or Japanese privet. You can go to this device in the lower right, which is called a forestry mulcher. And basically what it does is it turns these under 4 or 5 inch or so stems, anything below that size, into mulch. As you can see, all that's left after it's been through is mulch. So it's very effective at taking out woody invasives where they have essentially completely outcompeted all of your natives. Bring it down to mulch and then see what comes back. And you will get regrowth. There will be invasive seed in the ground. There will be native seed in the ground. And you're going to nurture the natives that come up, and you'll treat using whatever the appropriate technique is for the invasives that come up. If you keep an eye on these sites, say you do this mulching over the winter, in spring you come back and wait until the invasives get to be of a height that's big enough to hand pull. And first they won't all come back. Second, it's relatively easy when they're small, if the soil's moist, to hand pull them. Again, all strictly physical techniques here. All right, mulching or tarping. Basically, you're smothering your invasive plants, and this works for invasive plants that are typically dense on the ground. English ivy, winter creeper, vinca, mile-a-minute, creeping Charlie, chickweed, a few others. So in certain circumstances, you can just pile up about 6 or 8 inches of mulch, typically wood chips, on them. More often, what you'll do is you'll cut whatever the invasive is down to ground level by mowing, typically. Then lay down this kind of black plastic, and you want what's called UV resistant black plastic. It won't fall apart over time. Lay the plastic down over what you've just cut, and then put on something to hold it down. And typically it's wood chips, as you can see in this middle photo here, and just leave it. And every now and then you can go over and kind of pull up an edge and see what's happening underneath. And pretty soon being at most 1 season, but it may be just a couple of months, you're going to find nothing is growing. It's killed whatever it was that you were setting out to control. And you don't have to do it with vinyl. It can be done, as I say, with just mulch in some circumstances, or you can use cardboard, as you see here in this photograph. Now, as in most of the physical-only approaches, when you're not using herbicide, some of it is going to survive. So the game's not over in one treatment. You may have to do this for a second season, or for parts of the area where you're finding the invasives. you may have to do a little bit of it over time. A second time around, usually you don't have to do it a third time. And then again, you wait and see what comes up. And you'll probably have a mix of invasives and natives, and you nurture the natives and treat the invasives. And you can also apply seed. You can get native plant seed mixes. It just depends on what you want to see after you've done the treatment to control the invasives. By the way, there's a URL here for a site where you can get wood chips for free. And this is pretty much nationwide. And they're connected with companies that take trees down and ship them down to mulch, and they need to get rid of those chips. And they're looking for places to get rid of them instead of having to charge to have them taken to a dump or whatever. So check it out if you need mulch. Wood chips are great mulch. Great mulch. A slightly different approach here to smothering is to mow the area first to cut down the invasives, put the black plastic down, and particularly in areas where the soil is damp, wetlandish areas, don't cover them. Just leave the black plastic exposed, and it'll generate a lot of heat. And the heat will basically kill most of the roots. So that's another effective technique. You probably need to do a little bit of research to decide where solarization is a more effective technique than tarping. Okay, grazing. On the left, you see a bunch of skinny goats, and on the right, you see a bunch of fat goats. And on the left, you see a lot of invasives, and on the right, they ate them all. Of course, they ate everything else too. So that's one of the things you need to keep in mind. The reason why we used goats rather, in this particular situation was you can see how steep it is. And it was a little bit too steep to be in there working by hand without the risk of falling. So we brought the goats in. And you need an experienced goat herd, one who knows how to do vegetation management. It's not free. You have to pay for these. They will eat good and bad stuff, and they're not affecting the roots, so you're going to get grow back. But as you can see in the comparison in the photographs, they will clear out a lot of stuff for you. Okay. Containment. Containment doesn't kill the invasive plants. What it does is it keeps them from expanding. So on the left, we're looking at bamboo, and say your neighbors have decided they want to plant some bamboo for privacy purposes. You are going to get that bamboo on your property unless you do something. And a very effective technique is just to dig a little ditch, as you see in this photograph on the left, and you can put in some vinyl. It's about I think it's about a 18 to 24 inch piece, and it's very thin vinyl and not expensive at all. And it's still very effective at stopping the lateral movement of running bamboo, because it's at the tips where it's the new growth is coming. The root-like structures are very, very thin, and they can't get through this plastic. So it's very effective. It does not kill. It does not remove the problem. It simply contains it. And similarly here, lots of people like to have ground cover. And unfortunately, the one that's most available and least expensive at your nursery or big box store is English ivy. And if you plant it like you see in the center here, center photo, you'll notice that there's a cleared area around this cherry tree. You definitely want to keep it away from anything vertical, because if it starts to climb up, once it's been up a tree or some other vertical surface long enough, and it's usually a few years, it converts from its juvenile form, as you see here, where the only way it can spread is by creeping, to its mature form, and it starts to produce fruit. The birds eat the fruit, and then you have it everywhere. So if you simply can't bring yourself to get rid of your invasive ground cover, at least keep it from going vertical. So that's containment. And another containment technique you see here on the right, which is, um, let's say you're just in love with your, oh, let's see, I can think of several, Nandina or burning bush, and you just really like the way they look. Snip off their seeds. And you don't want to wait as long as in this photo where the seeds have become mature because birds are already starting to eat them. You want to snip them off while they're still green before they become appetizing to critters that want to eat it and spread it. So here's some techniques that you can use. Again, no herbicide involved. Um, they don't kill the plant, they just keep it from spreading. Okay, so there are more physical techniques, which we don't have time to go into, but I would recommend that you take a look at this document, which is available online, the PDF for it here. You can see the URL rather. Now, this comes out of California, and there are some of the techniques here. There are about 30 purely physical techniques. Some of them don't apply to us because they're, dry ecosystem plants techniques, but a lot of them do, some of which I didn't have time for. So you might want to grab this and take a look at it and see if it gives you some additional ideas for dealing with problems that you may have with invasive plants without using chemicals. Speaking of chemicals, we would be remiss if we tried to talk about how to deal with invasive plants without addressing herbicides. They're commonly used, and they're commonly used for some compelling reasons. So we'll get into that. So there are a couple different ways that herbicides are used. One is they can be used on their own with you just spraying herbicide on a particular target plant's leaves. That's called foliar application. You're applying the herbicide to the foliage. Another technique is called basal bark, where you're applying the herbicide to the exterior, to the bark at the base of woody invasive plants. Small trees under 6 to 8 inches, because once they get bigger than that, the herbicide can't get through the bark and get into the vascular system of the plant and move downward into the roots. But for anything below that size, below 6 to 8 inches, whether it's a big shrub like a big, mature autumn olive, privet, for all of your saplings and smaller trees under 6 to 8 inches, it's a great technique, and we'll look at how it works shortly. And then there are combination techniques where you use a combination of some physical act, which typically involves one type or another of cutting, where you're creating an entry wound into a woody plant that you can then apply the herbicide into. And by creating that entry point, you open up the vascular system so that you can put the herbicide in and it will move downward into the roots and kill the plant. And there are two very common techniques that are combination techniques. The first is cut stump, where you typically cut the plant off down at about ground level and then apply herbicide to the exterior portion of the trunk, the outer edge of the cut portion of it. And then there's the hack and squirt technique or scrape and squirt, where you typically use some kind of a cutting device like a hatchet, or some people use a machete. And you put a cut into the exterior of the plant and then spray the herbicide into the cut. And we'll look at how these techniques work. But first, let's spend a minute at least talking about why people use herbicides. And the basic goal is that herbicides kill the plant and it won't grow back. So the plant that you treat, if you use the proper technique, the proper herbicide, the proper concentration, the proper tool, it will not grow back. So here in this photo in the upper right, this is about a 2.5 inch autumn olive, which was cut, purely physical, no herbicide used. And what you can see has happened is um, it's sprouted a whole bunch of new stem sprouts. So you're ahead of the game by making that cut without using herbicide, and that you've taken out the plant, but it's going to grow back, and it's going to grow back more profusely. So you've got to come back and do it again, and you're going to have to come back and do it again and again, usually about 5 or 6 times until you've exhausted all the stored energy in the roots, and it won't grow back. So why do people use herbicides? Because you treat it once and you don't have to continue doing it repeatedly. Um, Secondly, there are some invasive plants which simply cannot be controlled using strictly physical techniques. You have to use herbicide, or else what they do is you may get rid of the single plant itself, but it's going to create a whole bunch of new sprouts. In this middle photograph, you're looking at tree of heaven, or Ailanthus. This is the tree right here. It was blown down by the wind, and its response to that kind of an occurrence, or us cutting it down with a chainsaw, for instance, is to pop up these sprouts from its entire root system. So you may get rid of one tree by cutting it down without using herbicide, but you're going to get 30 more, 40, 50 back. So using herbicide with the correct technique, you will not get that grow back. And then, of course, there's just a question of scale. As you see here in the lower right, this is stilt grass, but it could be a number of other invasive grasses or forbs where they're covering multiple acres. You can't hand pull it. It's too much. You'd need an army. You can't mow it in this forest kind of a situation. So typically it's sprayed with herbicide. And let's say it was stilt grass. Just an interesting point about stilt grass and a number of other invasive plants is when you spray them with herbicide, the concentration of the actual herbicide itself is extremely low. For stilt grass, you're using 99.5% water and 0.5% active ingredient. So even if you're covering 2 or 3 acres, you're talking about only using a few ounces of herbicide, a very, very small amount. So it's not like we're encouraging people to go out and rent an airplane and spray acres and acres of of invasive plants from the air. We use very little herbicide, and we apply it in the way that is most effective with the smallest amount. Okay, so no matter what nice things we say about the effects of herbicides, they are poison. And you have to be careful with them, both for your own protection as a user and for the protection of native plants when you're applying it in a situation where you have invasive plants mixed in with natives. So what you're looking at here is on the left, this is a segment of the label. Labeling for herbicides is regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, and the labels aren't, kind of like the label you see on a can of soup or olives or something, where you see it's got this much fat in it and this much sugar and whatever. Typically, it's multi-page, and it covers what's the name of the product, what are its active ingredients, what is it that's killing the plant, what are the potential environmental hazards of using it. Every label has this information. It has details on how to protect pollinators. Basically, don't apply the herbicide when the pollinators are around. It has specific directions for use, application instructions for various types of woody invasives, for grasses, for forbs. These things go on for several pages, and will specifically address individual plants. It talks about drift management. How do you make sure that the herbicide that you're applying, if you're spraying it, using a spray bottle, for instance, is hitting your target and not drifting off and hitting adjacent native plants? Um, it tells you in the label, what else is in this bottle of stuff besides the active ingredient. Because there's usually relatively little active ingredient. Most of it is stuff that simply keeps it liquefied. Sometimes, or quite often, there is a chemical that's added that's called a surfactant, which is a surface active agent. Its purpose is to break down the protective layer on the leaves of an invasive plant to allow the herbicide to penetrate better. Some herbicides most of them that we use are mixed in water, but there are some that are mixed in oil. Oil-based herbicides are used for basal bark. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And quite often they come with a dye in them so that you can see, what did I hit, what did I miss? And of course, it goes into application rates. What is the maximum amount that I should be applying in a given acre? Now, that really only applies to large agricultural areas. As I mentioned before, we apply very, very little herbicide to each plant, tiny amounts. Anyhow, um, safety, safety, safety. If you are applying herbicide, you need to be wearing personal protective equipment. So on the left, we see an individual who is all set to go. Actually, he's wearing non-absorbent gloves, but they happen to be flesh colored. But he is actually wearing gloves, long sleeve shirt, long pants. He's wearing boots, rubber boots, non-absorptive that come up to the knees, eye protection, and he happens to be working next to a roadway. So he's got a safety vest on as well. But then you look over here and you go, oh my gosh, I mean, this is a horror story. Short sleeve shirt, short pants, no gloves. The eye protection is on the top of the head, not on the eyes. I mean, geesh, don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. So let's start talking about some of the real things here of doing the business of trying to control invasive plants with herbicides. When I work with herbicides, most of the time I'm using what's called an aquatic compatible herbicide. You definitely have to be using that kind of an herbicide when you're working on the invasive plants that you typically find near water courses. This is lesser celandine. You'll always find it on stream banks. This is yellow flag iris. It's either in the water or right next to the water. Your herbicide is probably going to touch water, and there are herbicides which are not going to affect the water, the aquatic environment. So that's the kind you want to use. I pretty much always use those, even if I'm working in a forest, because you just don't know when you're going to come by a water course or some standing water. Okay. Timing. When do herbicides work and when do herbicides not work? Or when should you be using them? When should you not be using them? So upper in the photo in the upper right here, you can see you can apply herbicide in the winter. These trees have been cut down. They're sub-invasive, not sure what. And you can see that herbicide was applied around the outer edge, which is the technique we'll be looking at shortly. So it can be too cold. When you're using water-based herbicides, which are called amine herbicides, which is what most of us use, they're effective down to about 30 degrees. But here in Piedmont, Central Virginia, we get a lot of days in the winter they're above 50 degrees. It's just a lot more comfortable to work then. But they're effective down to about 30 degrees. The oil-based herbicides are effective down to about 20 degrees. Below those temperatures, the herbicide is still effective, but the woody plant itself is shutting down its vascular system to reduce movement within it in order to cope with the cold weather. So it's not the herbicide that's a problem, it's the plant that's a problem. It's not receptive. And then the other end of the spectrum, of course, is, when is it too hot? For water-based herbicides, there's really no upper limit. It's, again, an issue of your comfort. But for oil-based herbicides, there is an issue. You don't want to be using them at over 85 degrees because they can start to, you can start to lose control of them. They simply will not stay where you want them to go. So, ester, that is oil-based herbicides, and not over 85 degrees. And of course, if we're getting into spring now, and plants are going to start blooming, going to start blossoming. Okay, and that's going to attract pollinators. So, not a good time to be spraying herbicide on a plant when you have pollinators. So, do it before they show up, do it after they show up. And then last but not least, and we're going to spend a few minutes on this because the big deal with herbicides in the spring is that for your woody plants that have gone dormant over the winter, when they wake up and start to go through the leaf out process, herbicides don't work. And that's because as the plant is emerging from dormancy, it's moving water and nutrients from the soil through the roots up into the plant in order to get the leaves to bud and the flowers to bud. And that movement of liquid is very strong. It's so strong that if you apply herbicide above ground, the herbicide can't get down to the roots. So you're wasting your time, you're wasting herbicide. You're putting herbicide into the environment that's not going to accomplish anything. So let's talk about that a little bit because that's where we are right now. It's mid-March. So let me give you an example here using, let's see. What are we using? Bittersweet, right? Okay, so this is bittersweet vine. And over the winter, it's been dormant. And this is what the buds look like during dormancy. Small, tight. Well, right about now, the days are getting longer. There's more rainfall typically. There's more sunlight. Temperatures are moderating. And all of those signals tell the plant time to start leaf out. And they start to move water and nutrients upward. And this is what your buds are going to start to look like. And you can see they're swelling because they're receiving water and nutrients, and it's filling them up. And not surprisingly, we call this phase bud swell. Okay, the next thing that happens is the bud breaks open and the leaves pop out, as you see here. And we call this phase bud break. Okay. And now what's going to happen is the water and nutrients keep getting pushed up very vigorously, and the leaves start to take on their mature form. Now, from this phase here, bud swell through the point where you get enough leaf coverage and enough leaf size for the plant to start photosynthesizing, herbicide cannot get down into the roots because all the movement is upward. Once you get enough leaf mass, your leaves are maybe half to 3/4 of the way to full size or larger, then photosynthesis begins, and plants are designed to develop more food at any given time than they typically need, and they'll take some of that food and they'll move it downward into the roots for storage during dormancy. Once that starts to happen, there's downward movement. The upward movement through the vascular system isn't so intense that stuff can't get down, which means herbicide can get down. Okay, so that's kind of how the leaf out process works. The tricky part is figuring out where is a given plant in that process, particularly between this phase of dormancy and bud swell. Can you look at the plant and tell? And you really have to be clued into this process to be able to just look and tell. But there's some indications. Like this is what is this? This is multiflora rose. So here you can see leaf out has begun, starting to turn green. And if you looked closely at these leaves, you'd see that they're maybe a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch in size. That's not enough leaf out. The process hasn't evolved far enough yet for photosynthesis to be occurring such that there's both upward movement and downward movement in the vascular system, which would allow herbicide to work. But if you look over here, This photo I recall I took on April 11th, 2 years ago. Same plant. This is multiflora rose, and the leaves aren't full size yet, but there's a heck of a lot of leaf cover here. This is definitely photosynthesizing. So this would be time when you could start to apply herbicide, spraying herbicide on the leaves if you wished, or you could wait longer. But the tricky part is every plant does this at a different time in the spring. Some are going through the process as we speak right now. Others don't start until later, until late April, for instance, and aren't done until June, like mature tree of heaven. Um, they're not ready to be treated, the mature ones, the big ones. Saplings and seedlings come up a bit faster. But the mature ones, you don't want to be touching them until about early to mid-June, depending on where you are, okay? If you live south of here, North Carolina and further south, that's going to happen sooner. If you live north of here or at higher altitudes, it's going to happen later. So it's kind of tough to figure out what to do. So I'll give you a solution in a moment. If you see an invasive plant and it has leaves, you can treat it. If you see one and it doesn't have leaves, then you kind of have to figure out where it is. And if you know how to figure out where it is, if you can tell by looking at it, then you can tell that you can either go ahead and use herbicide or that it's the wrong time. If it doesn't have leaves, you can't tell where it is in the leaf out process, leave it alone for a few weeks, come back and look at it again. Go look at other targets, a whole bunch of which I'll give you in a list shortly. And you can always use physical only techniques. All we're talking about here is application of herbicide. Okay, so safe spring targets for herbicide use. All of your evergreens, the plants that are photosynthesizing year-round. English ivy, winter creeper, and your semi-evergreens, Japanese honeysuckle vine, bush honeysuckle, Chinese privet, barberry. Those are semi-evergreen. Nandina is evergreen. Leatherleaf mahonia is evergreen. Thorny olive, vinca. There's a bunch of them. You also have your plants that are emerging in the winter and are good targets. Garlic mustard, lesser celandine, wild garlic, and size fumwort. And then for your woody ones, some of them start the process early, like wineberry, rose, olive. Calorie pear right now is flowering. We'll talk a little bit about that. It's actually not a good time to be applying it to calorie pear. It's flowering, but its leaves aren't out yet. It flowers first, then leaves out later. But here's a whole bunch of good targets if you're not sure whether a woody invasive is still in the leaf out process and should be left alone as an herbicide user. Whew. Okay. So I mentioned that I'd talk a little bit about Bradford pear, calorie pear. So Bradford pear is a cultivar of this tree, calorie pear. They're both invasive. Bradford pears you typically find as a landscape tree. This is the parent tree that you'll see out in the woods. And you'll notice their shape is quite different. This one is kind of gumdrop shaped. This one is more columnar, narrow. They're flowering right now. You can see them all over the place where I live. But they have not leafed out. So they're going to start, their flower is going to start to wilt, and you're going to start to see the emergence of the leaves. What this is a really good time for now when they're flowering is marking their location because they stand out like a sore thumb. So if you see them and it's on a property that you have anything to do with, mark their location. You can mark them on a map. You can write down a note. You can go out and tie some trail tape on it, however you want to do it, and then come back once it's leafed out and you can treat it. Okay, so that whole long spiel was about timing because timing is such a challenging issue in the springtime for herbicide application. So for those things that you can use herbicide for, and for the rest of the year, there are two basic herbicide-only application techniques. Foliar spray, where you spray the leaves. That's what you see in this photo. This gentleman is spraying the leaves. You'll notice, by the way, that he's spraying down. Okay, you always want to be applying it to a target that's below your wand, because if you spray upward, you can lose control of where your herbicide is going, and it could end up on a native plant that's nearby. So you always want to spray down. The second technique is called basal bark spraying, and there you're not spraying leaves, you're spraying the bark. And you typically spray from ground level up to about 18 inches all the way around the base of the tree. And this particular tree, that's about that or just a little bit larger is as large as you want to try it on. Because once they get much bigger than that, the herbicide can't penetrate through the bark. Okay, so for foliar application, spraying the leaves, your first challenge is to pick a suitable target. In this photo at the upper right, we're looking at five-leaf akebia. And you'll notice that these leaves are quite far apart. There's a lot of space in there. You have to be really good with your spray wand to hit this target and not have your herbicide go through and potentially hit something you don't want it to hit. As opposed to this situation in the bottom right, where we're looking at English ivy, or you see the same thing for winter creeper. You can see it for vinca and so on, where the invasive plant has totally outcompeted all of the natives, with the exception of some taller shrubs that we see here or seedlings. No problem using herbicide here because the invasives have outcompeted all the good guys. So you can spray that. That's a really good target. You don't want to spray it on the trees. You have different techniques for getting it off the trees, and we'll talk about those. Okay, so basal bark, again, we're spraying. You can see the nozzle here from about 18 inches down. And the technique is to spray and then release your trigger, spray down, release your trigger. You don't just spray up and down and up and down all the way around because you can't control your application of herbicide in the spray location as well as if you just do single stripes. Okay, so you want to be very careful about where you're applying the herbicide. And there are time-tested techniques for making sure that your herbicide is only going where you want it. Again, you have to use an oil-based herbicide for this technique for basal bark because the oil is going to help transport the herbicide through the bark. The bark has to be dry. It's not a good time to be doing this after prolonged rainfall and the bark is full of water because it won't be able to, the herbicide can't get into it. And you want to completely spray all the way around your target plant, all the way around the base. Okay. So I mentioned that there are also what we call combination techniques where we do something physical to the plant and then we apply herbicide. And here's the two techniques. They're called cut stump, and you can see here that we've cut off. This is leatherleaf mahonia. You can tell it's the wood is yellow. So I cut it off just above ground level, and now here I'm using a drip bottle. I'm going to put just a couple of drops right around the outer edge. That's called the cut stump technique because we cut it and we're now going to apply the herbicide to the stump. Very common technique. The second very common technique, even more common, is called hack and squirt, where you hack into your woody stem, and this could be a tree, it can be a large vine, it can be a large shrub, and then you're going to spray herbicide into the hack. So by cutting into it, you've created an open access into the vascular system, which is just under the bark, and then you apply the herbicide, and it moves downward into the roots. Okay, so here's a little bit more on cut stump and the different kinds of applicators you can use. This particular applicator is called a dauber, and it's like a bingo bottle. It has a soft tip, kind of like a foam surface, and there's a valve in the cap. And if you press the container, the tip, to the surface that you want to apply the herbicide to, the valve opens and a little bit of herbicide comes out. So it is surgically precise. It's only going to put herbicide where you want to put the herbicide. You can take that bottle and hold it over your hand and shake it as hard as you want. Nothing will come out until you apply pressure and release that valve. So it is the most precise applicator of herbicide that you can get. And you're only going to apply maybe a milliliter, just a tiny amount. Excuse me. You can also use a drip bottle. Excuse me again. With a drip bottle, you're just applying a couple of drops. And as you can see here with the spray bottle, you only apply it for these larger trunks right around the edges. And the reason for that is the center part, the vascular tissue is no longer active. It's not connected to the roots anymore. So applying it to like the whole top of a cut plant is a wasted effort. In fact, if you look closely here, right along the outer edge, you can see a slightly lighter colored line. Here you see it again. That's where the vascular tissue is. That's where the absorption is occurring, right there, right under the bark. So you don't have to apply herbicide all over the place here. Just needs it on the edge. Now, when you're cutting something really small, it's only a half an inch around or an inch around, it's kind of hard to just get the edge. Sometimes you will apply it to the entire surface, but just because there's no physical way to restrict it just to the outside. But for bigger targets like this, just have to get the outside. Doesn't take much herbicide at all. Okay, so that was all cut stump, where you cut the thing off usually down close to ground level and then apply herbicide around the outer edge. With hack and squirt, you're using a different approach. You're hacking into the woody plant. As you can see here, you typically want to be cutting it around a 45-degree angle because that leaves this opening here. If you cut too narrow, your hatchet could actually slide off. If you cut too far out, your herbicide, when you apply it, could drip out. So you want to create a nice little pocket. And then you want to take usually this is applied with a spray bottle like this, stick the nozzle of it right in that hack and give it just a little tap, and all of your herbicide goes right where you want. Very, very precise technique. This is what foresters typically use. It uses the least amount of herbicide. And you're usually applying it at around hip height, right where a hatchet swing would occur. So you're a long ways from ground level. Even if you put in a little bit more than you need and it dripped out, it's not going to make it to the ground. So it's a very safe technique. When you're dealing with large trunks, like a mature tree, there's kind of a trick that you perform here where you don't make your hacks continuous. That's called girdling. You don't cut continually. You hack, leave a little space, hack, leave a little space, all the way around. Now, the reason you leave some space is what that does is it doesn't sever all of the vascular tissue. It still leaves the vascular tissue in these uncut portions viable. So if you cut all the way around, the plant realizes it can't move water and nutrients up. It can't move food down for storage. Everything's stopped because you severed the entire vascular system. And what's going to happen is the plant is going to go into its survival mode and it's going to start to sprout. And it may be root sprouting, it may be trunk sprouting, it may be a combination of it. So you fool it. You leave some of the vascular tissue intact. Hack, space, hack, space. And the space you usually use is about 2 inches. Hack, leave a couple inches, hack, leave a couple inches. If you really want to get down to the fine points, the time it takes you to do the hacks all around a fairly large trunk, by the time you come back around to start applying the herbicide, wounds in woody plants seal quite quickly. So don't cut all the way around and then spray. Do 2 or 3 hacks, apply the herbicide, do 2 or 3 more, apply the herbicide, do 2 or 3 more. So that you're sure that the herbicide is still going to be absorbed, that the plant has not sealed off the wound that you've created. Okay. So this doesn't just apply to trees. This is a big English ivy vine, maybe a 3-inch vine. And I hacked it, put a little bit of herbicide in. This is a privet, and it's a multi-trunk privet. There's actually another trunk over here, and you can see I've hacked here, I hacked here, hacked over here. So I put multiple hacks in, and then apply a little bit of herbicide in each of the hacks. So you can use it for trees, you can use it for large vines, you can use it for large shrubs. And once you get down to the point, for instance, let's say you're doing English ivy or some other vine that's on a tree. Now, if the vine is pretty narrow, you don't want to try hacking into a small vine like this. It's okay for this because you're not going to cut through and get into the tree. But once you get into small ones, you don't want to be hacking in. Instead, you want to hack almost straight down. And all you're doing is stripping off the outer protective layer of bark. And then you apply your herbicide to the area where you've stripped it off. Okay. And that keeps you from hacking into the tree and damaging the tree. Okay. Grasses. Talk a little bit about grasses. Same kind of stuff. Hand pulling. If they're not coming out easily with hand pulling, you can use some assistance. Digging. You can mow. If you mow, you're going to have to mow repeatedly. In some situations where it's continuous, you could use tarping. And in some cases, you can use grazing. The difficult part comes when you have a mix of grasses, invasive grasses and native grasses. So here we have in the photo on the right, the taller, lighter colored grass is rough bluegrass, and it's growing in tall fescue. The darker colors is your lawn, tall fescue. So how are you going to apply herbicide here without affecting your lawn, your fescue? And that's a little difficult. But there are some herbicides which you would most likely need to contact people who deal with sod or landscape firms, and they can tell you what herbicide to use in a situation like this. There are ones that you can use. Otherwise, you're trying to dig it out, and then you're putting holes in your lawn. It's kind of a tricky situation. Forbs. Again, non-woody flowering plants other than grasses. So a couple of them that you have to be careful about. Lesser celandine. This is a photo of lesser celandine that was dug out of the ground, and we kind of shook the soil off it. It produces seed, but it can also spread vegetatively. If you try to dig it out of the ground, if you leave any of these little fine roots, if you leave any of these other features, it's going to regrow. So it's very difficult to try to use physical techniques only with lesser celandine. Typically, you have to spray it. And I'll note this is second year garlic mustard, and you're going to see it flowering in another 6 weeks or so. If you see flowers, it's really easy to hand pull, but you can't just leave it lying there because it can continue to produce seed even if you've pulled it out of the ground. So if you see flowers, you got to bag it and carry it out. All right. So everything we've been talking about here, there's a document available that tries to summarize, what kind of plant are we talking about? When's the best time to go after it? What control methods are the most effective ones? If herbicide is recommended or suggested, the herbicide rates, concentrations, which ones to use, it's all here. And this is available on our website. It's a document from the Virginia Department of Forestry. And I think I got to stop now because we're running out of time. Is that correct, Lauren? Anybody?
You can, how many more minutes do you have?
2, 3. I just have a couple slides, really.
Go ahead and finish those up.
Okay. So I do want to mention sanitation, disposal. Some of these plants, like I just mentioned here, for second year garlic mustard, you can't leave that stuff lying around after it starts to flower because it's going to continue to seed. So there are documents that are available that you can look at to tell you which ones can you leave around and which ones can't. And if you can't, what do you do about them? Another thing is if you're taking seeds off, this is Nandina or for burning bush, you need to put that in the garbage. Okay, you need to put it in a plastic bag and put it in the garbage. You don't want to put it in recycle. You don't want to try to do anything with it where it could continue to grow. The method of propagation tells you how you dispose of it. And you basically just you have to learn all this stuff. It's lots of fun. Okay. And last but not least, safety. You know, you're using sharp tools for the cutting stuff. You're out there mixing with some nasty stuff like this is poison ivy. This, by the way, if this was leafed out, you would think that these lateral branches here are part of the tree. They're not. This is poison ivy. It will grow laterally off the tree. And you're moving through the forest and you want to push it out of your way. It might be poison ivy. So you really need to be able to identify that. You need to be careful with your tools. If you're using herbicide, you need to be using PPE. If you're working out there in the warm weather that we're getting towards now, we're going to have bees, we're going to have snakes, we're going to have all sorts of stuff that you got to be paying attention to. So work safely. You don't want to go out and have a bad experience because then you won't want to go out again. And we need you out there to help us. So thank you. I think I'm done.
Thank you, Tim. That was fabulous information. I hope everybody appreciated that. Um, Natalie put in the chat the list or a link to our events page. Really quick, we have two upcoming events that you may be interested in. Next week, we're going to be offering a short brown bag webinar called What Seedling Is This? And the focus will be on identifying the invasive seedlings that are showing up right now that you can easily hand pull just the way that Tim talked about in the early part of this webinar. So herbicide-free treatment can get out there and learn how to identify invasive seedlings versus the native seedlings that you want to protect. That's a new webinar for us. And also in April, our quarterly meeting is going to be called Demystifying Herbicides. So we're going to take all of the questions that we receive over and over again. The world of herbicides can be very confusing. Brand names, mixing, where to buy them, what to use them on. And we're going to break it down and simplify this information to make it much easier for everyone and just streamline the information that you need for treating invasives on your property. So again, that's April 22nd. We don't have the registration link up yet, but that will go up shortly and it will be listed on the events page of our website. And lastly, I'll put the link in our chat to our donate page. We are a small nonprofit and we rely on gifts from friends like you. If you found this webinar helpful, please share the link in our YouTube video and please continue supporting us so that we can continue to provide great content like this. It takes a village. We all have to get out there and do this work and help reverse the spread of invasive plants in Virginia. So again, if we can give a round of applause and love to Tim, thank you so much for providing this wonderful webinar and we'll see you the next time around.